All right, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing our tafsir. So, the past, I guess, 2 days we had been working on tafsir. We had been working on this page, and you could see the highlights are still there and the scribbles are still there. So, I'm going to delete everything really quick. And we went in lots of details, in lots and lots of details in regards to these ayat. Are they basically the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, or is it the story of Prophet Ibrahim's personal journey, or is it Prophet Ibrahim's journey to making the da'wah to his people? And there was a question that we didn't actually answer, which, of course, in Tafsir al-Qurtubi goes in details with, but I'm just going to make the story short, okay? And which is this one. وكيف أخاف, which is the last ayah right there. وكيف أخاف ما أشركتم ولا تخافون أنكم أشركتم بالله ما لم ينزل به عليكم سلطانا فأي الفريقين أحق بالأمن إن كنتم تعلمون. Of course, when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam had made this announcement, إِنِّي وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, when he had made the announcement that he was going to redirect, or at least not redirect, let's do direct his face, or direct his identity, or direct his vision to the Lord that had created the heavens and the earth, that's when they realized that he was on a completely different deen, on a completely different vision, on a completely different sharia, on a completely different aqidah than the mass, or at least than everyone else's. That's when, certainly, when he had announced that he was Hanifa, and not only that, he announced what he was, and he announced وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, and what he denounces. What does that mean? In order to place aqidah, it's not enough to say la ilaha illallah, but you also have to complete it with Muhammadun Rasulullah. And in other words, when you look at la ilah, there is a rejection, and there is illallah, there's an affirmation. And that's the same thing. I was just asked earlier this morning about the Alawi, and the Nusayriya creed and all of that, and whether they consider themselves Muslim. Some are saying that they consider themselves Muslim, etc. Then therefore, can they be considered Muslim? It's not enough to just say, well, I believe these things in Islam, but it's important to say that I also reject the kufr that, for example, if it's Christianity, the kufr that isn't Christianity, the kufr that isn't Alawiyya or Nusayriya, the kufr in this and that. Why is that the case? Because when you look at each and every single time, there's an affirmation in Aqidah, there's also another rejection. In other words, you are simply making that balance. You are not affirming a certain faith alone, but you're also denouncing everything that contradicts the meaning and what this affirmation contains. So when he announced, وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, I'm not a part of this faith, I'm not a part of this system of whole faith, that, of course, because that civilization, quote unquote, is basically based on that idea, is based on that vision. Now, here's one thing. You might say, well, that civilization based on that vision? The answer is yes. And you want to keep this one in mind. Because historically speaking, when you look at any civilization, the civilization that would remain from their civilization, whether we're talking about architecture, we're talking about the buildings, temples, etc., they're usually centered around a faith. Go wherever you may go, it's going to be a temple that is based on a certain faith. That's all that stands. All those different civilizations. So even you look at the pyramids were centered around the faith of the pharaohs, the faith of at least the ancient Egyptians, that the akhirah, or the hereafter, is what they're supposed to be working towards, what they're supposed to be building towards, and then they build and basically embedded and contributed all their efforts in this dunya towards their belief system. And that's not any different from the Babylonians, the Aztecs, the Hindus, the ancient Japanese, or the ancient Confucius, Taoist, whatever it is, the ancient Chinese, the ancient African, different African faiths, etc. The main thing that remains, even in Greece, and even the Greek, what remains is usually the things that basically, or are usually the things that are centered around a certain faith. So when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam said, وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, they regarded that this is basically an attack on their belief system, on the whole civilization that they basically gear all their efforts towards. By the way, even during our time, this is not any different. The belief system today, whether they call it democracy, which basically is based on individualism, or capitalism, and the list goes on, and whether you're speaking about atheism or whether you're speaking about feminism, you're talking about a whole belief system, whether it denounces God and considers that man is supposed to be living, or we're gearing and contributing our energy, our system towards creating more money, and creating more and more consumers, and creating this type of system that is based on liberal system that is giving people these types of they would call it freedoms, but these types of aberrations that basically go against human nature, etc. So they would basically have a certain system, and that's why they would see Islam as وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, and they would see Islam as the threat that basically is considered as opposing their system. So when you look at وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, whether you're speaking about a shirk or whether you're speaking about the different types of kufr. So that's why they would say, well, they don't actually give women their rights. What they mean is basically based on their definition of rights, their definition of freedom, their definition of economical freedom, their definition of what they would consider freedom. Islam considers that as not freedom, but considers it as injustice. It's an injustice against humanity. It's an injustice against nature. It's an injustice against faith, against Tawheed itself, against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's an injustice against even the fair distribution in economy, and an injustice in social injustices, again, towards families as well. So we're looking at the deen, nafs, aql, ird, man. It reminds me of what Rib'i ibn Amir. Who's Rib'i ibn Amir? We talked about him before. Even though the story isn't necessarily narrated in authentic narrations, but it was actually mentioned in numerous books of Sirah. Books of Sirah are different than the books of Hadith. What happened? Rib'i ibn Amir is, at the time, similar to, you can call him like an ambassador that was speaking on behalf of the Muslim army. Who does he meet? Well, he meets with his counterpart, the Persian ambassador on behalf of Kisra. So when he sits with him, he said, what are you guys fighting after? So what is this war all about? And he said, ابتعثنا الله لنخرج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent us from or into freeing the people from worshiping people to worshiping the Lord of the people. وَمِن ضِيقِ الدُّنْيَا إِلَى سِعَةِ الْآخِرَةِ. And from the narrowness of this life to the vastness of the hereafter. So what does that mean? You just basically just summarized the whole thing about Aqidah in Aqidah, and the whole thing about Sharia, that it was about making sure that people recognize and that we're there to free them from the elite, from the capitalist, from those that are considered the politicians, from controlling them into committing those injustices, to bringing justice, to bringing fair distribution, to bringing Aqidah in place, and basically not worshiping the people and not being enslaved by the people, but to free them from such enslavement and to give them freedom to worshiping Allah Almighty. That's the same thing. What we see today is subliminal worship of people. People would think that they're practicing freedom, but the truth of the matter is that you're seeing people that are controlled in their food, in their mind, in their lifestyle, in each and every single corner without them realizing. So, وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ. The second you stand to denounce the shirk, that civilization, a quote-unquote, of course, civilization, is based on, because it would be considered as modernity and not necessarily a civilization, because in Islam, this civilization that's based on shirk and based on injustice is going to be called as jahiliyyah and not hadara. Okay, but that's a different story. We'll talk about that later. وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ. The second you stand against their civilization, you're going to be attacked in the beginning. They will basically do it as a form of debate. It would be a conversation because they would regard you as not worthy of giving you any attention. But once they realize that your arguments have gone strong, that's when you would basically realize that the effort, the power, the opposition is going to grow stronger and stronger to basically face your strong arguments. So in other words, this is actually good news and bad news for the Muslims. Well, the good news for the Muslims of today, just when you would see that the opposition has grown against Muslims, okay, and you could see that that Muslims are being targeted left and right, etc. That is actually telling you that the Muslim presence is one, very much recognized. Number two, that their power in the different rhetoric that the Muslims are laying out is stronger and stronger. But there's one bad news. The stronger the Muslims get, the stronger the opposition is expected to get. What does that mean? Right now, you could see a lot of solidarity with the Muslims in Palestine. You could see a lot of support, basically geared towards supporting the Palestinians. A lot is right now being exposed about the politics to why the Muslims, why the Palestine, or what is actually happening, why in politicians, and then certainly that there is a whole game of making a certain group or even other groups, and they don't care about humanity. They don't care about anybody's life. They are bloodsuckers. They don't care about justice, and that basically exposes them, and they would lose their trust in their governments, lose their trust in the system itself. Okay, once people start getting that awakening, that's when you will see that those that are benefiting from the system will grow even fiercer because they recognize their system is falling out of their hands. So expect more and more of not only Gaza, but expect more and more of inhumane and certainly these types of fearful attacks, not to just be located in Gaza, but it will be located in different areas and towards different people with false accusations, and definitely will be false accusations as long as they do not get exposed with the reality of what they really are. And of course, they will work towards whatever it takes in order to instill their power, which is basically what they were benefiting from in controlling the masses. And controlling the masses basically happens by controlling them and getting them pacified with things such as gaming, things such as sexual lust, and things such as the food, etc. All these different things to get them in dunya in order for them to make money out of that. Once they make money out of that, that's when they would control the masses. Okay, so وَحَاجَهُ قَوْمُهُ قَالَ أَتُحَاجُّونِي فِي اللَّهِ وَقَدْ هَدَانِ. We talked about this one, and we said مد لازم كلمي مثقل، مد لازم كلمي مثقل. and we talked about this one في الله وقد هدان ولا أخاف ما تشركون به. Now here's one thing. ولا أخاف ما تشركون به. That's when the scholars actually went in details. Was this ولا أخاف ما تشركون به? Is the pronoun به referring to that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was not afraid, telling them that I'm not afraid of what you would regard as basically the gods, because they were saying, hey, you denounce our gods, there's going to be a bad thing coming at you, and they're going to basically retaliate because you had rejected our gods, and it's going to be coming at you and giving you harms. So is that the case? وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ was just saying, I'm not afraid, because these leaders, in order to control the masses, they would make you afraid. This is the key thing. They would make you afraid of losing your job, afraid of probably losing your life, or probably losing your children, probably losing your citizenship, probably losing your rights, and the list goes on and on. So there's definitely always a price that you might be paying in order to get to Jannah. Just keep that in mind. There's no way that you can get to Jannah unless you get through an ibtila. Yes, you might lose your cars, you might lose your home, you might lose your income, you might lose, perhaps get imprisoned, lose your freedom, lose a number of different things. But for a believer, they would basically insist to stay determined on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ, is the pronoun bihi referring to their gods? Or is it وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ, that bihi is referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore that what you are making shirk, what you are making that shirk in with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with me being in faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will be protected from what you would worship. Is that what it means? So scholars actually had these different interpretations on how we understand وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ. But of course, at the end, we realize that a lot of the different interpretations really fall on pronouns and what they really are referring to, or may sometimes not only the pronouns but the word itself, and how do we interpret that one. And certainly whether in the Quran or whether in other books, you would always see إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا. You would always say, okay, which pronoun and what is this pronoun referring to, and so forth. Okay, and most of the tafsir, most of the different interpretations actually go in the pronouns, to be honest. The differences in how we understand the pronouns and what is it referring to, etc. And just like this one, فَأَيُّ الْفَرِيقَيْنِ أَحَقُّ بِالْأَمْنِ? Is it from who's going to be the one to be safer, or who's the one that's going to be deserving safety and security? Is it from the torture of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the basically the harm, or is it going to be in this life, or is it in the akhirah? How do we put within the context? Okay, so that's when of course you would look into the context itself. So when they have differences of opinions on the pronouns, it basically is centered around a certain context. How do we understand the context? And based on the understanding of the context is basically going to determine the interpretation. Okay, let's see the other part. إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا. Unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills something. And some scholars actually said إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا, that this is actually related to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, recognizing that at one point he had probably committed a certain sin بحق الله subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so that's why here إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا, is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given me the empowerment that I would not be fearing them? Or is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically had allowed that perhaps something I had committed, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a result of that sin, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might actually let certain torments or certain harm basically pass and let some of that pain inflict me. So you could see إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا, the context and the different interpretations that scholars had actually considered as possible interpretations. Okay, and that's why, is the pronoun be he right there? Is this referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is this referring to the people, or what they were worshipping and all of that? So again, if it was referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ, meaning what you would associate partners with, okay, meaning what the things that you worship, basically? Or is it referring وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ, referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that as long as I'm with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would not be afraid. And yes, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ. Ustaza Umayya, go ahead, dear.
Bismillah. إلا أن يشاء ربي شيئا, as if there is murad lillah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this, but the tafsir and al-Qurtubi, لا يشاء أن أخافهم.
Right. So
how it comes to لا or يشاء أن أخافهم? If this
يعني أن الله تعالى لا يشاء أن أخافهم. So look at the word. يعني أن الله تعالى لا يشاء أن أخافهم. يعني إيش؟ حتى the same thing with Prophet Musa عليه السلام. When Prophet Musa عليه السلام was afraid, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? إني لا يخاف لدي المرسلون. All right? The prophets, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them the empowerment to not be afraid. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was disciplining at that moment when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam had run away from the stick, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, أقبل ولا تخف, come back and don't be afraid. إني لا يخاف لدي المرسلون. What happened? He tells him, no, the prophets and the messengers, they don't actually live that fear. What was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing? Giving him that discipline, giving him that announcement, that giving him that clarification that you will be secure, you will be secure, you will be safe, you will be strong, you will always be strong. Okay, so when you see here, when the scholars actually said that, basically means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or يعني أن الله تعالى لا يشاء أن يخافهم, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed that I would not be fearful of what you might threaten me with.
Unless Allah
subhanahu wa ta'ala wills.
أخاف, not لا أخافهم.
But exactly, unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills that, in other words, some fear may be there as part of human nature. Okay, so I'm not afraid, or that fear will not get to the level of deterring me away from announcing haqq. But some level of fear, which is part of human nature, just like Prophet Musa alayhi salam, when he was afraid of Fir'aun and his junud, he basically fled to the people of Madian. Why did he flee there? He was afraid that they were gonna kill him. Right? He was afraid that they were going to kill him. So some fear as part of human nature, this can happen on prophets as well. Okay?
So we have here two negative, ولا and إلا أن يشاء ألا يشاء, بمعنى, meaning ربي شيئا. شيئا, what's this شيئا?
شيئا, anything, of course, whenever it's nakira, in nakira is basically to tell us that it can be in different forms. Okay? Who knows what they're planning and what they could be harming in? Who knows what it is? But at the same time, he's basically letting it, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا. I don't have all the knowledge to what might happen, but if there is anything of what I do not know within al-ghaib, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed something that I might be afraid at that moment, or I might be as a result of something, some evil thing or some harm might actually inflict me, that is in the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? It's also saying, well, yes, I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect me. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give me the protection, but at the same time, I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is within his will that some possible harm may happen, and therefore I am not here imposing anything on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will goes beyond all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will goes beyond all, and therefore basically leaving it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that controls al-qada and al-qadar. Let's see. The sister is saying there's a hadith about palm reading. That's very scary. Would my prayers be accepted? Okay, you got into a completely different topic. I'll answer that one at the end, inshallah. Does the act of Musa alayhi salam show cowardice? Once my friend said that he was not courageous enough. Absolutely not. This is disrespecting and dishonoring a prophet to say that Prophet Musa alayhi salam was a coward. This is disrespecting the prophet. She needs to do istighfar on that. Prophet Musa alayhi salam was not a coward. Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he was when the Fir'aun and his junud, when they had actually come, just like in Surah al-Shu'ara, when they said, Inna la mudrakun, what did he say? He said, Kalla, inna ma'i rabbi sayahdeen. That's not a coward. That's a person that will be strong, courageous, even when Fir'aun and all his people had basically gotten so close. And they said, Inna lamudrakun, that's it. They're catching us. What they're gonna slice us. That's it. Said kalla. What is kalla? Kalla is not just saying la. No, kalla is an affirmative verb and saying absolutely not. Inna ma'ya. Again, not he didn't just say kalla, but he made a complete and an absolute denouncement to what they had claimed, and then brings another affirmation. Inna ma'ya rabbi sayahdin. Sayahdin, inna, basically is considering that something verily. Ma'ya, with me. Sayahdin, the scene right there, when it comes before the verb that is a present verb, sayahdin, with the noon right there, with that noon that is noon at-tawkid. You know how many tawkids are in this sentence? Kalla inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdin. There are 3 tawkids in this sentence. Kalla is one tawkid to tell you absolutely not. Inna, here's the first tawkid. Here's the first affirmation. Sayahdin, that seen and the ya, that's a third affirmation. Telling you absolutely not. Allah will be the one to guide me. He will be the one to protect us. Keep going. He was not a coward whatsoever. And neither was Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. To call any prophet, to call him a coward or to call him in any disrespectful description is actually kufr. It's actually kufr. So be careful. She needs to do istighfar. Okay, let's see. She said, I didn't get answers, and my intention was not to see the answer of that particular meaning, the palm reading. Yeah, well, inshallah, we'll talk about that one, inshallah. Okay, let's continue right there. So I hope did I explain that one, Ustaza Umayyah?
Yeah, but one thing, the first meaning of إلا أن يشاء ربي أن يلحقني شيء من المكروه بذنب عملته فتتم مشيئته. This is يعني related to عقيدة. This the same that remind us with حذيفة بن اليمان or the Ibrahim bin Adham, that Muradullah subhanahu wa ta'ala beyond any action we do it. It's like a paying attention for
Right,
something we did it wrong.
Right, let me explain one. When he said إلا أن يشاء ربي شيئا, remember it comes with عقيدة القضاء والقدر. That yes, I will make the dua, for example, or I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect me, but I cannot be so sure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect me, so I will say إلا أن يشاء الله, or I will say inshallah. So even when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told you that he would give victory to the Salihin, inshallah, this war or this whatever you're doing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you that he would give you victory, inshallah, you would still say it. Why? Because it can happen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may will, whether as a result of sin or whether as a result of his hikmah or his wisdom, that something would not be in accordance to what you had basically been told previously, to what you had expected, a complete security at the moment. Qada'u qadar can also and is also, when evil things do happen, is also part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mashi'ah. So what does that mean? When we look at will, we usually see as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would only will good things. But when we see قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ, some will, min shar, min is للتبعيد, as part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may will, is basically something that is to you as evil, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not will absolute evil. You see what's happening in Gaza, for example. Certainly, it is absolute evil to basically attack and basically not give food and to basically kill. That's absolute evil. But for a mu'min, they would recognize that, yes, regardless of the American support, the Israeli attack and all of that, or whether whatever they had done on October 7, whether it was the right timing, whether it was the wrong timing, or whether it was they were prepared, not prepared, all of that, that's a different story. Okay, that's a different story. But when you're looking at one thing, is this absolute evil in regards to the attack? The answer is yes. Then the other question, when we look at the situation, okay, it will AC. When we see that something like this basically happening to the people, okay, when we see something like this happening to the people, is that absolute evil? We said yes, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not let absolute evil basically take place and never give them any justice. So they will get justice, and this justice will basically be something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them for as a result of their patience and as a result of basically the injustice that happened to them. Okay, so putting that within the context is important for us to understand how we read how we read basically pain, or how we read إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا. That certainly some things can happen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, inshallah, will give them victory, but this pain that one goes through, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that these people are going through this pain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that these people are going through complete injustice. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why didn't He intervene and stop this pain? Why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're dying of hunger. Why can't He probably, maybe, I don't know, let the soil basically start becoming green, let some rain come down, and this rain will probably bring crops, and it becomes green right there, and there go basically the Lord Almighty's miracles basically coming in. Okay, now here's the thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not necessarily intervene without you putting in the necessary powers, the necessary means, and the necessary factors to basically make, whether victory, make a solution, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to work towards that. That's why اعقل وتوكل. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعدوا لهم ما استطعتم من قوة. Prepare what you can from arms, from weaponry, from power, good economy, whatever it is, science, physics, whatever it is, you have to work on that. Don't expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's intervention to basically give you that victory like that. You have to put in the power, you have to put in the means, and that's basically صراع الحق مع الباطل. That's basically the battle between good and evil. The battle between good and evil is basically just that. You have to put in the effort, and don't expect a divine intervention each and every single time. And that's the same thing. إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا. Is it possible that they can probably harm Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam? It is possible. Just like, for example, the Prophet ﷺ had told us about Prophet Yahya, that his people or Bani Israel, they basically had sliced him up using a saw. Using a saw. That's what they did. Is it possible? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect him? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically let things happen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or divine intervention, would not happen each and every single time something wrong happens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still let things continue going as is, and the mustad'afin and the people, they would have to do their job in supporting themselves. They would have to do their job in giving the different factors, basically the odds, in order to bring in victory and defense to themselves. Don't expect it to just come from the divine like that. So when he said, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا, because Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam knows that just because he does not want pain to happen on him, that does not mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will act based on Prophet Ibrahim's will. In other words, Allah's will is beyond my will. That's adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's adab from Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam in understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will is beyond my will. Yes, I may not want this pain to happen to me, but if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills it, He's the one that determines how much pain will go through, how much defeat will I be facing, how much of perhaps victory they will be given or I will be given. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to determine. So when he says, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا, that's adab ma Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That yes, I recognize that there may be pain, a price to pay, but I'll let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will determine how things will unfold. وَسِعَ رَبِّي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا. And that is related. I do not know what might unfold in al-ghaib, but the Lord Almighty's ilm is beyond time, is beyond place, is beyond people. So what He knows is beyond what I would want to happen. So that's when he said, وَلَا أَخَافُ, I am not afraid. But I recognize that my will and my ability to control my fears is probably within my hands, but the pain that might be inflicted on me definitely goes in contradiction with what I don't want happening to me. But at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will goes beyond what I would want happening, what I'm afraid of, etc. أَفَلَا تَتَذَكَّرُونَ? Not remember, do you not recognize all of that? Did I answer that one, dear?
Yeah, Mom. Page 444, you see the before the index. Can you roll it down, please? This is what I want. إلا أن يشاء ربي إلا أن يشاء أن يلحقني شيء من المكروه بذنب فعلته فتتم مشيئة الله. What did the sin he did it?
So he explains that this is استثناء ليس من الأول. Okay, so it's basically that this is istithna, that this is basically an exception, and this exception إلا أن يشاء ربي شيئا, that this is an istithna, this is an exception that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will basically goes beyond, like I said, that unless perhaps that they might inflict some pain on me, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may let their pain infliction take place not as a result of me committing, me doing tawheed and practicing tawheed and basically going against your lords, So in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he is punished, the punishment, or let's say not a punishment, but when he is probably inflicted with pain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not will that pain that was inflicted on him as a result of him committing basically the evil thing according to them. To them, leaving worshiping their God is an evil thing. Okay? So, Tawheed is a good thing. Shirk is a bad thing. So, when he said, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا, what he was saying is that this is an exception that unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows some pain to basically be a punishment for a sin I had committed, but there would be never a punishment for practicing Tawheed. Okay? So, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ يَلْحَقَنِي شَيْءٌ مَكْرُوهٌ بِذَنْبٍ. In other words, the people in prison right now, some, they are in prison, perhaps, definitely, because they were doing da'wah, because they chose to stand strong and speak against the injustices that these leaders and these leaders are actually doing, whether against their own people or whether against the people of the people that would make da'wah, etc. So of course they chose to speak against them, and then Sisi, for example, imprisons them, and that imprisonment certainly is evil. But could it be, and can it be, that some of them might have actually been imprisoned for a sin that they had committed? Perhaps that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Would we call, let's say, imprisoning, X person or Y person? Let's, give an example. Okay? What is that guy's name? Muhammad Ismail. Okay? Definitely, this man was actually doing something that was good. His only problem, according to Sisi, for example, was him defending basically Mursi, that was enough. He was a possible supporter for Mursi, and therefore maybe a person that would be encouraging people to stand against his governance, that is his Sisi. So what does he do? Basically puts him in prison. Is that an oppressive act? Absolutely, it's an oppressive act. Absolutely, it's injustice. But when you are with him, you would say, do istighfar. The sin that he committed, that he might have committed one day, who knows, that it could be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purifying him, maybe for what he had committed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to basically give him this purification, maybe to give him empowerment, maybe he's going to be the future president, who knows what political changes might happen, and perhaps these political changes, the situation that he is in, maybe that's what's going to empower him to be something different. Who knows?
So we take the Tafseer al-Qurtubi in consideration in this point.
Right. So, all these things we don't really know. So we just, there's a difference between doing the personal therapy, okay, and between doing the general, let's say, the general, how do we say, the general judgment. So the general judgment, yes, this person was imprisoned in an injustice matter. in basically for no crime that he had committed. Okay. But for on a personal note, we would say continue istighfar. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to empower you. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for victory. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this and this. Let's give a Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Yusuf alayhi salam, what did he say? What did he? رَبِّ السِّجْنُ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا يَدْعُونَنِي إِلَيْهِ. He asked for a sijn. But then he eventually said to his to that guy that was with him, basically the inmate that was with him, اذكرني عند ربك. Tell your master to just remember me. Somehow it looks like my name had been forgotten, that I was in there. Somehow, please, talk to, if you manage, and I know based on your dream that one day you're going to be like a bartender, basically a person that is going to be really close to the king. All I want from you is, hey, just somehow intervene and just remember me. Maybe that'll get me out of prison. What happened? Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, was he in prison for any evil that he had committed? No, absolutely not.
We can pay attention.
He had done the right thing. He didn't want to be seduced by these women, but he said, "Rabbi sajnu ahabbu ilayya ma yad'unani." You asked for it. You were in there because you asked for it. He could have actually done the same thing and made the dua. Well, why didn't he make the dua? You said, "Rabbi sajnu ahabbu ilayya ma yad'unani." Why didn't you make the dua? Ya Allah, farraj kurbati, and get me out of prison. Was he shy to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a dua that he had made, or what was it? Okay, that's a different story. But so when we look at illa ayyasha rabbi shay'a, it's adab from Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam that recognizes that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might will some pain to be inflicted upon me for a sin that I might have committed or something that I might have committed, then in that situation, his will take over.
Jazakallah khairan, and sorry for taking time on this point.
No problem. وَكَيْفَ أَخَافُ مَا أَشْرَكْتُمْ وَلَا تَخَافُونَ أَنَّكُمْ أَشْرَكْتُمْ بِاللَّهِ. So now that also explains that fear. What kind of fear is permissible fear? So he said, well, why should I be afraid of what you had associated partners with? And that's basically when al-Qurtubi said, وَهَذَا اسْتِثْنَاءٌ لَيْسَ مِنَ الْأَوَّلِ. That's in order to explain to us that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, was basically announcing that I'm not afraid, and affirming, I'm not afraid of your gods. Because they were telling him, if you disbelieve in our gods, that's basically going to then bring you bad omen, going to bring you the gods to retaliate against you. In other words, you're not going to be safe anymore. So that's when he basically says, well, I'm not afraid of that. And why should I be afraid of that when you should be the ones afraid of the shirk that you had committed? مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ عَلَيْكُمْ سُلْطَانًا. When the Lord Almighty had not given you any authority or any evidence that is permissible to worship. فَأَيُّ الْفَرِيقَيْنِ أَحَقُّ بِالْأَمْنِ. Then who's the one that's basically having the right to feel safe? From what? From the torment of the Lord Almighty. In other words, the true pain, the true fear is not the fear in this life, but the fear in the hereafter. Because this fear is temporary. You might be having the power to take away my job, take away my citizenship, take away my powers, whatever it is. You might have that power, but the true security is not the security in this life, but the security in the hereafter. You might have the power to probably disempower me and basically put me in danger. That I may not debate you on that. I know you have the upper hand right now. I don't have the power, but the true the true security is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then when he said, فَأَيُّ الْفَرِيقَيْنِ أَحَقُّ بِالْأَمْنِ, that's basically Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam telling them, well, who really is the one to be in a place of security? In kuntum ta'lamun. He's coming in with the same logic that he had come before when he was telling them, well, if this is not the one that has the power to stay, to give, to basically to give the energy, then same thing, it would not be capable of giving security. Now, that's when he would basically announce with the same idea and coming with the same exact concept, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يَلْبِسُوا إِيمَانَهُمْ بِظُلْمٍ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. That's when he announces. And with that announcement comes in and says, well, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those that would be in faith, and they would not mix with their faith any zulm, any injustice, any wronghood. Those are the people that would have al-amn. Those would be the people that would have the security, that would have the safety, that would have the victory. وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. Now, some scholars actually said, it's not mentioned on here, but considered that when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam said, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا, they said, when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam had said, unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills that any harm would inflict me, he said, because he recognized that those that would be in faith and they would not include anything that is basically against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, any sin, that those would be the people that would have al-amn, that would be in complete security. So what does that mean? Let's see in Sahihain, the reason for this hadith, for this ayah, or the reason for why this ayah was revealed. Okay. Ibn Mas'ud narrated that when this ayah was revealed, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يَلْبِسُوا إِيمَانَهُمْ بِظُلْمٍ, those that believe and they do not put a garment of faith on their sin. Wait, what does that even mean? What does that even look like? It can happen that we may do something and then we would think that we're doing the right thing. And in fact, we might be so sneaky and give it a religious label that, yeah, it's halal, and guess what? Differences of opinions between scholars, and basically put in a label. I have the right to do this because she did this and he did that, and yeah, it's because I'm trying to protect myself and all of that. And then we would give ourselves the religious justification. We would somehow make a religious interpretation that I'm doing this out of faith. It's for a good thing, when in reality, what we're doing is nothing but oppression, nothing but zulm, nothing but sin. So when this ayah was revealed, and notice the word yalbisu, by the way. The word yalbisu means to wear something. Okay? So when it said the believers and they do not put a garment of faith on a sin that they would, or an oppression that they would commit? Or does it mean that in iman itself, faith itself, that they don't mix with it? Where did you get mix? I thought yalbisu means to wear something. So when you wear something, what you wear, it basically blends with you. Okay. So in other words, they have faith and they don't blend with their faith any zulm, any oppression, or any wrong thing. They don't blend any wronghood with it. In other words, they have faith that is actually a commitment, that is actually a faith that is not mixed with other dhulm, with other wrong things. Those are the people that are mu'mineen. When the Sahaba read and heard this ayah, it became so intense on them. And they said, which of us did not commit any form of transgression? So the Prophet ﷺ said, this is not as what you might interpret or what you might think, but this is as Luqman had said to his son, Ya bunayya la tushrik billah inna shirka la dhulmun azim. It is as I keep saying prophet, as Luqman had said to his son, O son, do not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for a shirk is indeed what is the word? A grave transgression. Okay, so that's basically what it means. So in other words, it doesn't mean that committing sin is not dhulm. Committing sin is dhulm. But this hadith that was in basically Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim is letting us know that this ayah is related to shirk. Okay, and I want you to look at this one, because when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam had said, "Illa an yasha'a rabbi shay'a," when the question that was asked, is this related to a sin that he might have committed, and he was afraid that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might allow some pain to be inflicted upon him as a result of something that he might have committed, because he was afraid of the fact that the believers, if they would mix any form of transgression, that they would not be safe. And he was afraid that this might actually become what might allow some pain or some harm to basically happen to him as a result of something that he might have committed. I want you to look, أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ. Those are the people that would be safe. So here's the thing. Can we say that anybody that is not safe, who knows what you had committed, you probably deserved it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what he knows in al-ghaib, that's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to judge. But your responsibility is to protect those that were oppressed. Your responsibility is to end injustice. Your responsibility is to support the needy, is to support those that are facing calamities, etc. That's your responsibility. At the end, this is your responsibility. How you understand all the details of, yeah, maybe they had committed something, that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to think that, yes, they might have committed something and therefore they deserved it, is definitely evil. For you to basically can give yourself the justification not to do the noble act. That's being a coward. Because your duty is to uplift harm. Your duty is to uplift any injustice that you would see. Your duty, and in order to be a noble person, is to, whenever you see wronghood, you would basically intervene to stop wronghood. That's what it means to be noble. That's what it means to be a person of honor. وَتِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا آتَيْنَاهَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ. Now, when you see وَتِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا, The word tilka, it's a demonstrative pronoun. It's telling me, well, that is the argument that was going to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. So comes in the question, is this code الذين آمنوا ولم يلبسوا إيمانهم بظلم أولئك لهم الأمن وهم مهتدون? Yes, it's part of the ayat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed, but is this what Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was saying as a part of all the other statements? Or is this more of a clause that was not necessarily as part of what Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was saying, but as, let's say, a theme that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically mentioning as within the story? You know, it's kind of like this. Somebody might say a story, and while they're saying the story, you might actually have a comment in between. Say, oh, you see what happens to those that do this? Let's continue with the story. Okay? So in other words, they injected, or there was this interjection right there, okay, within the story. And is this really part of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam's words, and which is why it says tilka hujjatuna? Or is this a statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically letting us know a certain theme for us? Well, the story doesn't tell us really what happened to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, at least within this ayah, but it tells us in another ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا. In another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us they managed to throw him in the fire, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "O fire, be bard." So what happened? Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was thrown in the fire. There's no question about that. But the fire didn't actually harm Prophet Ibrahim much. It was bard and salam. It was peaceful and it was bard. He wasn't feeling it as burning. Not at all. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically promised الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يَلْبِسُوا إِيمَانَهُمْ بِظُلْمٍ أُولَئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ, that he was in al-amn. But Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, تَأَدُّبًا, as adab, and as part of adab, he said, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, أُولَئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ, they would be safe. وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. وَتِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا آتَيْنَاهَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ عَلَى قَوْمِهِ نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتٍ مَّن نَّشَاءُ إِنَّ رَبَّكَ حَكِيمٌ عَلِيمٌ. And that is the argument, the power of argument. Some people are really good at debating. Others are not good at debating. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was given the power of debate, was given the power to basically be able to bring about the argument clear to them. But here's one thing. Just because you might have a clear, good argument in a good debate that you probably are skilled to do, just because people are not accepting the argument, it doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't lay out enough evidence. Because sometimes people's arrogance is what is blocking them from embracing the truth and not necessarily the argument. Just got to keep that one in mind. It's their arrogance that is refusing, and not necessarily lack of evidence and lack of argument. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا آتَيْنَاهَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ عَلَى قَوْمِهِ نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتٍ مَّن نَّشَاءُ. Here's a question. Is نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتِ or نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتٍ مَّن نَّشَاءُ two different qira'at? Okay. Is that supposed to mean that, again, debating is a ilm, and certainly you cannot debate unless you have ilm. The more ilm you have, the stronger your capacity and the stronger your argument would become. Why? Because you would be capable of recognizing the loopholes, the gaps, the contradictories, the discrepancies within the other opponent's argument. You would say, well, here's the problem with your argument, and here's the other side that you may not know. So you would be then introducing in an area which this person may not have knowledge of. So in order to debate, you have to have knowledge about the argument, your own objection, basically, and what the other person's argument, and you recognizing and helping that other person basically recognize the gaps, the discrepancies, the contradictions within their argument. And you wouldn't be able to recognize that unless you had the ilm about their argument and what they are saying and all the different evidences to basically denounce their argument. And at the same time, you would also come in to propose a certain argument that denounces the other opponent's argument. This is ilm. So when he said, نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتٍ مَنْ نَشَاءُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would elevate whomever he wills, this is to tell us what? Remember, when you're looking at الدرجات, usually الدرجات is related to two things in the Quran. One, العلم, and two, al-iman. Al-ilm and al-iman. Okay, so when you look at نرفع درجات من نشاء, in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever you have ilm in something, know that it is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you were given. نرفع درجات من نشاء, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates whom he wills beyond others in ilm, beyond others in insight, beyond others in also their authority. Inna rabbaka hakimun alim. Your Lord Almighty is Hakim and Alim. Well, why Hakim Alim and not Qawiyun Aziz? Why Hakim Alim, not Qawiyun Aziz? Hakim, because what is al-hikmah? Al-hikmah is وضع الشيء في موضعه. What is al-hikmah? وضع الشيء في موضعه means that putting some things where they belong. That's al-hikmah. Hikmah is not possible to actually make the right decisions, do the right thing, unless you also had the knowledge. But having knowledge is not enough. Having knowledge is not enough, because having knowledge may not necessarily mean the person knowing, let's say, a piece of information, actually have the ability to look ahead. Al-hikmah is also including looking ahead. We talked about this before. A person that is probably 13 years old is thinking the end of this year. My plans are this. Maybe that's a person, if they have enough hikmah, and they would look, the end of this year, this is what I want to be. But if this 13-year-old was planning and starting to put in their efforts to plan probably 10 years from now, I want to be a graduate in this, I want to have this done in my life, and therefore they're putting their efforts to start planning the goal that is probably 10 years from now, and they would be committed from, let's say, age 13. That's a Hakim person. They would put their efforts in where they belong to get into the long-term goal. Okay, so when you look at نرفع درجات من نشاء, okay, you're saying that requires hikmah. Who's going to be given this daraja, and looking at what efforts they would invest in. You invest in something, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically give you that daraja, that goal. You would get to that goal. You've got a goal, but it requires hikmah from you, and no hikmah is going to be attained unless it is given to you from al-Hakim, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-Hakim. No hikmah is going to be given to you unless it was given to you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, the best hikmah that you can get is the hikmah to be committed to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you're committed to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's when you would expect to narfa'u darajatin man nasha. Stick to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will see that that's going to elevate your steps. That's going to take you on the right path. That's going to lead you to basically going up the path of one, the path of authority, the path of power, the path of wisdom, the path of making the right decisions, the path of Jannah. Ali. And always remember, we said whenever you're seeing the word darajat in the Quran, it's either going to be relating to ilm or it's going to be related to iman. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, narfa'u darajatin man nasha. You want to be elevated, you got to connect with al-Hakim, with al-Alim. You're going to connect with ilm, you're going to connect with hikmah, and you're going to basically learn. And it's not enough to have the ilm, but you have to also have that commitment to look ahead years and years from now. And that's why somebody that is 20 is probably thinking ahead, maybe thinking ahead after I graduate, I want to get a job and probably get married and probably buy a house. They're thinking ahead, probably maybe 10 years. But somebody that is 40 is thinking about their grandchildren and what's going to happen to their grandchildren, and probably thinking ahead that they would want their son or daughters to marry somebody that is of a good deen in order to have a good offspring, etc. What are they planning now? They're planning 20 years from now, 30 years from now. And somebody that is probably even older, they had lived long enough, at age 70 or age 80, they had lived long enough to realize that وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ. They had realized, now they had become more committed than somebody that is probably 40 to really realize that the best of the investment that you could put in is al-amal al-salih, is good and pious actions, because they now know, they had lived long enough to know that marriage is not what brings you happiness. Money is not what brings you happiness. Degree is not necessarily what brings you happiness. All of those are tools, not goals. So for a mu'min, they recognize that the real goal is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ إِسْحَاقَ وَيَعْقُوبَ كُلًّا هَدَيْنَا وَنُوحًا هَدَيْنَا. What was it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given the darajat to whom He wills? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, remember when we talk about the offspring, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as a result of his commitment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him Ishaq and Yaqub. In other words, generations to come, to be committed as he was committed on faith and as he was committed on haqq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him an offspring that would continue his legacy. And that's that hikmah. How did he narfa'u darajatan man nasha? How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate him? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated him through the legacy to basically be carried through generations to come, and they would carry on. Kullan hadayna. They would carry on, and the most important thing that they would carry on is nothing but hidayah, nothing but guidance to the people, and certainly continuing as the previous guidance with Nuh before that, and even his offspring Dawood, Sulaiman, Ayub, etc. And it was many generations to come, basically. كَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. How نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ? That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically reward al-muhsinin in this dunya and even in akhirah. And certainly not only the offspring, but inshallah هديناهم إلى صراط مستقيم. They were all guided to the straight path. ذلك هدى الله يهدي به من يشاء من عباده ولو أشركوا لحبط عنهم ما كانوا يعملون. If they had associated partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then everything that they had invested would basically fall short. This is it. Subhanak Allahumma hamdik nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk for today, but there's a lot to say, okay? We're just making it short today. This is considered short, okay? So if there are any questions, inshallah, oh, there was a question in the chat. Let's look at it. Let's see. The sister was asking about, what was it? Reading the palms and all of that. So reading the palm or any form of reading, attempting to see al-ghaib or claiming to see al-ghaib, whether reading palms or whether looking at a coffee cup or whatever it is a form of shirk, because thinking that these things would have the power to know your future is a form of shirk. Make istighfar, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, and never do it again. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you for it. So yes, what surah is this? It's a Surah Al-An'am, my dear. You want to see it? Here it is. It's a Surah Al-An'am. You want to see it? Here we go. Here it is. It's a Surah Al-An'am, and this ayah right there. We are on page 138. Okay, oh look, 138. Ayat, and we're still going to do some more of this tomorrow, okay? This was just a prelude, okay? So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Is hikmah removed from you or start? Here's a good question. Is hikmah removed from you if you start sinning? Ahsanti. Ahsanti, good job. That is the inference, my dear. The inference, ahsanti, that was a very good one. Yes, al-hikmah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتٍ مَّن نَشَاءُ إِنَّ رَبَّكَ حَكِيمٌ عَلِيمٌ. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us the inference that the stronger and more commitment you put in connecting to the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only will it expand your ilm and your vision, but it will expand your vision and your commitment in this dunya and akhirah / you will be granted the wisdom. So when we say committed on principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're actually talking about being committed on basically the obligations, al-wajibat, or committed on basically the sunan, etc., basically the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more you're committed with that, certainly that can bring you hikmah. But it doesn't mean that if a person is religious that they necessarily have hikmah. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. وَمَن يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Okay? You are given hikmah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given you the most important and the best largesse and the best blessing ever. If you were to basically have the wisdom. And wisdom is not given to anybody. Wisdom comes with a lot of silence, because you would then learn more. When you are more silent, of course, what happens? You basically start learning more, because you would start observing more. The longer you observe, the more you're able to see. The less you talk, the more you hear. The more you hear, the more you're capable of processing different ideas. You're processing basically in how you can avoid harm. Al-hikmah is to avoid harm as well. Al-hikmah is to avoid harm. How do I avoid harm that might happen to me 10 years from now? How do I avoid maybe not getting a heart attack? Okay, exercise, eat right. So what are we doing? We're basically doing it from now. We're investing it from now to avoid basically the implications probably 5-10 years from now and so forth. What's the difference between hikmah and philosophy? So philosophy is studying different kinds of philosophies. Philosophy before used to include studying math. Okay, philosophy is basically different philosophies, and it's not just one philosophy. Al-hikmah you may not study philosophy and have hikmah. Okay? You may not study philosophy and have hikmah, because al-hikmah itself comes more with experience, comes more with having that knowledge that you plan ahead. So your father, for example, may not have had a college degree. Okay, he didn't know the philosophies of Kant, Descartes, and John Locke, and all these, all these philosophers, or even Plato and all these different philosophers. He probably didn't know any of these philosophers, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have hikmah. And therefore, your father will basically look at the situation with his experience. He'll tell you this person is not right for you, and this is the reason why. If you marry this person, he doesn't have a good job, therefore this person has shown lack of commitment. If he can't be committed in getting a job, can't be committed in school, therefore the chances are he's not going to be committed in marriage. So what does that mean? That wasn't philosophy. That was your father basically looking back and seeing that we can tell a human behavior, we can anticipate before things happen, we can anticipate where this is going. So therefore, based on that data, we would look ahead and make the decision before it happens, and possibly avoid maybe a divorce, or maybe avoid a wrong marriage, or basically avoid maybe wrong decisions, by knowing that all it needs is for us to read history, to research data of that sort in order to avoid what might happen in the future. I don't have to try drugs to know what might happen. We already know that by trying drugs that, hey, we had seen it on so many people, we know it in science, that you're basically going to get into addiction. The addiction is going to harm your brain. It's going to basically take over your will. You're going to lose your will. You're going to lose your money. You're going to lose your brain. You're going to lose your etc. So all that's basically all it needs is for us to see it around us, to know where the system and where the pattern's going. So we would have the hikmah and not the philosophy. So we'll go in details, inshallah, later on. Is this hadith sahih? Sahih. يحرم العبد الرزق بالذنب يصيبه. I believe it's an authentic hadith. I'll have to research. I'm not specialized in hadith, but I will look into it, inshallah. Which career gives one good hikam? Fiqh. And fiqh, and fiqh. That's the best hikmah that you can get. Fiqh gives you the best hikmah. You want hikmah? Go to fiqh. My favorite field is fiqh. Why? Because fiqh is the math of Sharia. Can we say that hikmah is about knowing the purpose? Yeah. I mean, when you look at hikmah, it depends on how the scholars defined it as وضع الشيء في موضعه. Other scholars might define it as planning ahead, in avoiding evil before it happens, and making the right decisions before it happens, before you getting to the point and then not knowing what decisions to make. In other words, is avoiding wrong 10 years from now, is that hikmah? Absolutely. That's hikmah. 10 years before, and making the right decisions before you get to 10 years from now, you probably might have, as a result of obesity, maybe a blood pressure, maybe closed arteries and all these different things. And then you're like, okay, can I start with my exercises and eating right now? It's like, sorry, but it's too late. You were supposed to start that 10 years ago. Okay, so now what are we doing? Now that wasn't a Hakim person. They were supposed to do that 10 years ago. Now they're too late. Now we're going to need a cardiologist intervention to basically open up your arteries and figure that out. Because even if you were to jump the whole day, it's probably now going to be bad for your heart and not good for you. All right. Now we're going to ask you to relax because your heart it's not going to be capable of taking this amount of stress on it. Okay. So it depends on the scholars and I guess the context that you are in, and they'll basically be giving you the different definitions based on the context that they would want to break it down for you and how they want to break it down for you. Okay. But in general, الحكمة وضع الشيء في موضعه. It's to do the right thing and putting things in where they belong. All right. This is it, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. Al-fiqh is the map of Sharia. Absolutely. Fiqh is the map of Sharia. So if there's anybody that would like to unmute themselves really quick, go ahead. Think we really went beyond time. Okay, this